Fantastic. Well, greetings, everyone. I'll maybe kick things off, and then Sabina, if you want to do some quick introductions. My name is Josh Crossman, and I'm the CEO and founder of Magnify, which is an AI and automation platform for post sales. We work with some extraordinary customers and companies around the world, including companies like Workday and GitHub and others. And it's a delight to be here today with you and excited to talk about this really important topic, AI data readiness. And we'll unpack it all in just a few minutes. But we're very fortunate to be joined by Sabina Pons, who is the CEO of Growth Molecules. And Sabina, if you want to give a quick introduction.
Yes, thank you. So I am Sabina Pons. I am based in Southern California. I am in a real office. You'll start to see people's feet walking by out there periodically. I get asked that all the time. CEO of Growth Molecules, we are a management consulting and technology services firm serving technology companies in their quest to protect and grow recurring revenue.
And we are going to have a wonderful conversation today. It's one that I think is probably overdue in the industry. We talk a lot about AI. How do you get your organization ready? What do we do? What are use cases? All those sorts of things. But as we're going to unpack today, understanding how to make your data ready for artificial intelligence and all of the things that we're trying to do with automation and machine learning, all this stuff is actually tremendously important. And we probably need to spend a bit more time as an industry, as a function, talking about this. So why don't we dive in? We've done a little bit of introductions, as I mentioned. My background, I was actually a practitioner for many, many years. I led customer success, support, onboarding, professional services, a variety of different companies, including Chef and Bright Edge. I think I've had about 40 heads of CS come out of my teams over the years, and including one of your former colleagues, Sabina, Amelia Danzica, used to work with us at Bright Edge, and spent about 9 years, almost a decade at McKinsey and Company, primarily working in high-tech GTM. And Sabina, you want to tell a little bit more about you? I did not realize until I saw this deck that you were a Taekwondo aficionado. Can you count in Korean? Can you Hanadul Setnek? Are you good with all the like commands and everything?
I can count to 10 in Korean.
Very cool.
And we have the proper greetings for our masters and some other basic things. But yes, I watched my son do it. I was an athlete my whole life, but not with martial arts. I'd never done that growing up. And I was asked by another mom friend, she's like, hey, if we get enough people together, the master says he'll take on an adult class. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So started in 2019 and at 2022, I got my black belt and I love
Wow.
it. It's really fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
you'll be responsible for keeping all of our panelists in line. So
Well, I told you earlier jokingly, like that crate back here is for dogs.
very good. Very good. All right. Fantastic. Well, here's what we're going to cover today. Several different topics. We're going to cover what is AI data readiness, and we're actually going to get relatively specific because I think in Sabina and I were talking about it, like getting more practical matters, and so we're going to talk about what it is, why it matters to you as a business. We're going to cover a set of best practices for getting your data AI ready. And then ultimately talk about some real life case examples. And all along the way, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll call on you, try and make it as interactive as possible. And we're actually going to have some surveys, and you have a chance to chime in and give sort of your sense of how your organization is doing. All right. So we'll start with what is AI data readiness. Really, what we're talking about is not sort of all up, okay, you've built every system and got everything done. It's specifically, you can make sure everybody's on mute, that'd be great. AI data readiness is a state in which an organization's data is sufficiently complete, clean, structured, integrated, and accessible. We're going to unpack what each of those mean, but basically, those are the five characteristics that the more you have your data mature on each of those dimensions, the more readily an AI system is going to be able to use this for analysis, for automation, for generative tasks, or other sorts of applications. You're surprised, you hear a lot of times like, oh, we're just going to throw it all into Chat GPT somehow, and it's just going to sort it all out. And the fact of the matter is that it won't. And the reason for that is that data is life. With apologies to Ted Lasso, that data is life for AI. As a company that works with lots of customers in big and small in the AI space, we've seen some really good implementations of Magnify. We've seen some good implementations of other AI tools, and we've seen some ones that have been a bit more painful. And it really boiled down to the key difference in each of those was how ready their data was. Now, the good news is it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's relatively quick to get there. We're going to talk about that today. Sabina, I don't know if you have any other sort of color commentary on this before we start to dive into a little more detail.
And yeah, this is an underpinning concept for really any business, whether they're leveraging AI or not. And that's the theme that we always see, right? Is garbage in, garbage out. And it's very seldom that people are confident in their data and have reliability and trust in it. And that just slows everything down. So it's an important foundational piece to have. It's even more important as we're now thinking about layering in AI and creating durable, efficient growth for our businesses.
That's right. That's right. So we were talking about these sort of five different characteristics, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a bit of fun today. Maybe fun's a strong word, but at least we're going to make it interactive. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to go through each of those. And this assessment, by the way, will be available to you. And we're going to send out the slides at the end of the webinar, so you'll have this. But we're going to go through each of the criteria and sort of unpack what those criteria mean, and then you have a chance to rate yourself. And then we're going to tally up the results at the end and sort of see how sort of broadly across the participants on this call, how we're doing. Okay, so the first is complete. Now, what do I mean by complete? Well, at a minimum, you need to have one or two. You have to have data. You have to have data in your system, and at a minimum, you want to have kind of one or two systems with enough data to sufficiently train the models to get to your desired outcomes. And what the desired outcomes are going to vary. We can talk about use cases if we want, but ultimately, you have to have enough data. So, for example, if you want to forecast revenue using AI, well, it's pretty important to have revenue to train the AI model off of. Or if you want AI to generate emails, to write emails for you, well, you probably need to be able to train the data off of like what is the tone of the email and the copy and the type of content that you want to share with them. It's not just enough to like point them to some Wikipedia pages or maybe a few support pages. You've got to actually have more context to do what's called RAG, which is effectively training. So you start with kind of one or two systems that's sufficient to train the model. Now, what happens is as you layer in more and more data into the system, usually the machines get smarter and smarter. The robots are able to train better. And that evolves with kind of length of data and breadth of data. And so what you want to make sure is that you layer in multiple systems. And this actually, we'll talk about how do you link those systems in a minute, but getting those multiple systems together becomes really important. And the more and more you start to layer it together. And then ultimately, you've got it all the way done. You've got it sort of all the way across all of your systems. And so I would ask ourselves, how do you rate yourself across these three use cases? Like, how would you do it? So what we're going to do is, I think, Dan, we hadn't practiced this a lot, but I think you're going to put in a poll in the chat, if I'm correct. And so how would you do this? Would you rate yourself getting started, scaling up, or high performing? And so, how would you rate yourself? Give everybody a chance to do that. I realize that we've got a cut and paste issue. The way to view high performing, so middle would be sufficient quality, adequate cases, and then you've got sort of all the data across all the systems that you need. And so we say not just sufficient, but excellent coverage across all the systems. And so how would you rate yourself? Getting started, scaling up, or high performing? Okay. And Dan, I can't see the poll because I'm presenting. So let me know when we've got the results and feel free to chime in.
Yeah,
And by the way, if anyone has questions along the way, feel free to ask them.
absolutely. Sounds like we're about there. So I'll go ahead and
Gotcha. Yeah. So relatively few sort of saw themselves as high performing. A lot of getting started folks are starting, okay, we've got some sufficient data. That's actually great news. That's enough to like really get moving. And that's fantastic. All right. The next one we're going to talk about is the cleanliness of your data. And this one's really, really tricky because your data is never perfectly clean. And Sabina's going to talk a little bit about this later of what it means to how do you start to think about this? But, getting started, I would say you should get relatively accurate data, somewhat accurate. It's consistent. And maybe what you've got is there's some massaging or cleanup that's happening outside the systems that you need to report with. So for example, in the case of like revenue, you're able to like, yeah, it's mostly there in Salesforce or wherever it is. Yeah, we've got to do some cleanup, with finance or whoever to remove some opportunities or adjust some fields or whatever, but we're able to do it. Really, what you want to be getting to is this middle category to minimum. So you want to get it, it's accurate, it's consistent, it's free from significant errors or duplicates. You're not having, multiple accounts in your Salesforce instance. You're not having kind of that, it may require a little cleanup manually before reporting direct from systems, but you can mostly report from your systems in scaling up. And then high performing is it is ready to go. And ultimately, what you're able to do is you can report using your data directly from your systems in near real time. That you can't, so I use a lot of examples of revenue, but this could be things like support tickets. And so, hey, you know what? Our support tickets are, they're tagged well. They're in, Zendesk or Intercom or Salesforce ticketing or whatever you have. And yep, we can run those reports. They're accurate, they're clean. And what I show in my systems are the same things that I want to, I'm going to show to my management team or to my executive team. So, how would you rate yourself against those dimensions? Same question. And Sabina, any comments on any of this while we're waiting for folks?
Oh, you've got this one covered. As I mentioned earlier, like it's hard for every company.
Yeah.
And also when we ask you how you think you're doing and yourself, we mean your organization. We're not putting it all on you to carry that potential burden, but the thought process being, how do you feel that your organization is managing cleanliness and data? And some companies we work with are doing it very well. They've figured it out and they have some best practices in place that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Others are struggling with it, and that's okay.
Yeah. So a little bit, maybe not quite as strong. Everybody sort of feels like, 2/3 look like they're getting started and about a third are sort of scaling up. So, okay. All right. Now let's talk about structure. This actually starts to matter more and more. This is more specific to AI. And there are kind of, as you may understand in AI, there are two types of data. There's kind of structured and unstructured data, but both of them still need to have what we're going to talk about, sort of what we're calling data structure. And what that is that if you think about a table, if you just say something in Excel, you're going to have rows and columns, and there are column headers and that there are row headers, right? So if I've got on this table, the column headers are getting started, scaling up, high performing, and also data criteria. And then the row header is structured. And then the information on this table is all the stuff inside the three rows here. It's important for all of your structured data that it's clean. And that you've got these well, you talk about clean, but being structured, it's actually got the headers on them and that you know what these things are. You'll be, probably not surprised, but things like, for instance, telemetry. We work with customers that are like, this is, button 1 2 3 4 8 9 Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Foxtrot, Gamma. And you're like, no human being knows what that is. And so then when you want AI to go like do something with that information, the AI has no context. Similarly, you have unstructured data. Unstructured data is fine. That means that it's just like a gong recording or a email. There's no information there, but it's stored. And then what you can start to do over time is you can actually have it labeled. So you can have images annotated or audios transcribed or things like that start to give more structure to the data. That's, I'd say, very advanced and be high performing if you tag that. But at a minimum for scaling up, what you want to do is you want to start recording and having all of your unstructured data being able to be ingested by a system on a systematic basis. So think about it this way. The more you get your table well structured and well labeled, and then you've also got for both your structured data, and then you're starting to record, and later you can start to tag your unstructured formats. That's going to allow AI to be able to do that. Now, there are systems out there that will tag unstructured data and things like that. There's a lot of ecosystem popping up about this right now. We're not going to talk about that today necessarily unless you want to. But those are the things you want to think about, both your structured and unstructured data. And I'm curious, how do you feel like you're doing on this? How clean are your rows and headers? Like, can people look at your data and understand what it is? And are you starting to at least save all of your emails and recordings and things like that to start to feed the systems?
I think this is a good point too, to before we go into the last two dimensions of what we think is data readiness. I'd love to hear if anybody has questions or comments
Mhm.
and feedback on what we're talking about so far,
Yeah.
whether that's coming off of mute or putting it in the chat. It's helpful for us to be able to curate our time together today to make sure that we're meeting you where you are. And also, maybe you have things that you can share with the group or we can all learn from you. That's the beauty of the community with which we all operate. Okay, what does that poll reveal to us?
Gotcha.
Similar.
Similar, similar. Yeah, very good. Any questions before we move on? All right. Okay, integrated. So this one can be a vexing problem, and usually one that is I think understood, but maybe not always appreciated in the way that it should be. And that is what we call integrated. So let's imagine I've got information. Let's pick a random human name, Sabina. And Sabina is, I've got information and support on Sabina. Sabina's filed a bunch of support tickets. I've got emails from Sabina. She logs into my platform. I know how much she's logged in, which, features she's using and what she's doing in the platform. We also know that, Sabina is based in Southern California in Salesforce and that she is the CEO. And so she's an executive buyer. And, there's lots of information across all these systems. However, there are other Sabinas in the world, maybe even other Sabina Ponses, or there are other, divisions of a company, or, do we know that Growth Molecules has sister companies, or all of these sorts of things. And so what we need to be able to do is we need to know that Sabina in Salesforce is the same Sabina in Zendesk and the same Sabina in Gainsight and Pendo and everything else that we've got. Now, most companies understand that's a pretty important thing. And so most companies have the ability to link some basic data across systems. And usually what they use is they use a Salesforce ID, whether that's an account ID or a contact ID to try and do that. Or maybe they'll use email, but it's got to be unique. And they can link some basic data across the systems. Now, they can do that usually at basic data at a getting started level. Well, I just know that because I've got a relatively few companies and I use maybe some fuzzy logic like email matching. Over time, what you want to do is you want to get to unique IDs. And those unique IDs are really, really important. And emails are okay. They're not ideal. Um, and what, a lot of companies start to do is they start to do kind of what we call a chain of logic. It's like, oh, well, I know, how to connect Salesforce to Gainsight and I connect Gainsight to Zendesk. So therefore, the hand bone's connected to the, wrist bone, the wrist bone's connected to the arm bone's connected to the shoulder bone. Okay, that's how I can kind of do it. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to get away from that string of pearls and you want to be moving to structured and unstructured data that's easily linked to accounts and users using those unique IDs across all your systems. And so that a table, I can look at any system and not have to try and do some complicated chain of logic. AI can do it, and they can use things like pointer tables and other things to sort of sort it out and build those kind of data maps. But it's much better if those unique IDs are linked across systems at the top level. And if you can do that, that AI can move so much faster because it can immediately sort of go and query data and find data and link it and be much more precise about how it's doing. So I'm very curious. How do you feel like you're doing on integrating your data?
Hey Josh, just as we're grabbing those results, I think we may have had a question earlier
Okay.
from Sarah. Sarah wasn't, go ahead and pull you off mute if you wanted to go ahead and ask your question real fast. Oh, but you might also be, there we go.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
No worries. All good. All good, Sarah.
No problem.
Cool. All right. How do we do on the poll here, Dan? All right. So a little better, a little more scaling up. That's good. Um, but not yet, not yet there for everybody. Okay. All right. Last but not least, it's accessible. So this is actually kind of a big deal when IT gets involved or InfoSec gets involved, um, because AI wants the ability to slurp up all the data in the world. Like that's how ChatGPT is now worth $1 gazillion, is that they've slurped up the entire human repository of data. I think what was it? Maybe it was Perplexity, or maybe it's, I forget who it was, but somebody was buying like every book off of Amazon and scanning them in and then literally ripping the books apart and shredding them at the end. There was a report in the Wall Street Journal about it. Like they want more data. AI wants more data. And so what you want to do is it has to be available and accessed. But what's important for AI is that it's updated. Um, Now, what most companies will do is they'll say, okay, I'm just going to dump this all into some sort of data warehouse. I'm going to give permission to AI. I'm going to take a look at it. And that's really, really valuable. And it's basic. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that it's updated regularly. Ultimately, you want to be updated at a cadence that matches the AI needs that you're doing. So if you want kind of like real-time pricing, you need to be updating your transaction data near real time with AI. Or if you're going to be sending out, responses to support tickets, well, your support ticket data needs to be updated really quickly. On the other hand, if you're doing sort of revenue forecasting, maybe that data can be updated daily or weekly or monthly even. Now, the last thing I'll say is that the more data that comes in, the scarier this starts to be for our friends who care about governance and control and data security and regulatory compliance and all the other things that we have come to know and love in the industry. And so you need to have increasingly granular permissions and audit tracing. And eventually you're going to have all the proper permissioning, security, and compliance controls so that you can see who's taking what data where. And even, for example, like who can access the data. So, once you start becoming a public company, for example, not everyone can see all the data because you run the risk of things like Sarbanes-Oxley or insider trading or things like that. And so you've got to be able to put all of that on there. And that's not something that necessarily post-sales is doing, but you need to be able to understand that that's a dynamic that you're working with your friends in IT or InfoSec on to make sure that, the data is being updated and also you're not putting the company at risk.
I think the concept of data democratization, that's a phrase we use often with our customers. And the thought being that different personas and roles within the organization need different levels of data.
Yeah.
And right. So thinking about a CSM, a customer success manager responsible for their customer portfolio of accounts, so helping to keep those customers, helping them adopt software, thinking about their opportunities for, what we call product white space. How can they be using more of the products and features? Are there upsell, cross opportunities? In order for a CSM to have that information, to have that telemetry data, to be able to action on the next best step, they need certain key pieces and they need them to be reliable and they need them to be accessible. And the point Josh made about that relationship with InfoSec teams, and in other cases, it could be, CS operations or sales ops, rev ops.
Yes.
It's really critical that as a leader and as somebody who has the influence to drive that change, that you're thinking through the different use cases and how that data needs to permeate the team in such a way that's meeting them where they are so they can action off of it in a way to protect the company bottom line, to deliver a remarkable customer experience, and to be really thoughtful about the levers that they can pull for their own individual performance and contribution.
Yep, absolutely. All right, why don't we put the poll up? And while we're doing that, I'm going to answer a question from Nipur. What's your perspective on balancing structured and unstructured data? And are there best practices to avoid over-structuring when labeled unstructured data might be more effective? That's a really thoughtful question. And just to kind of help, think about this, like you could take unstructured data and you could like parse it 1,000 ways, take an email and like, split it out a bunch of different information and then label it in that, whereas an LM might be able to do that. A couple of things I'll say. I will say that to the extent this is what I would say truly structured data. So think about things like product telemetry or behavioral data or data that's numeric in nature. I would say that LLMs are actually in some ways not as good with that data. And because what they're going to do, most LLMs are going to do some sort of text to SQL, natural language processing on it, and then like, oh, tell me how many customers are using feature A for 20 minutes a day based in Iowa. Um, well, what's going to happen is that LLM is then going to go write a SQL query, query the data, pull it out, and then transform it back into a sentence for you to understand. So in that world, having really good labels and structure on all of that behavioral and text, numeric data is super valuable for AI systems. So I think it's very hard in some ways to over-index on really good structure and human understandability in your numeric or truly structured data. On unstructured data, I would say that they're getting better and better at it, but the more context you can give the bots, the better. So understanding things like these are support tickets related to this category, or here are the support pages that are relevant for answering that question, or here are all the notes for this customer, but then you're linking it back to here's all the information about this customer in Gainsight or whatever to be able to, or whatever your CSP is or your, CRM is, that gives context to the LLM on the unstructured data is going to be really helpful. So tagging it appropriately, like, severity on support tickets or, positive, negative type phone calls are going to be useful. But the LLMs are pretty good at deriving meaning from the words. What they're less good at is understanding the context and how those words then relate back to other data. And so having really good linkages or tagging between that probably matters. All right. What was the answer to our question? Our poll. All right. All right. So similar. All right. So what does that mean? We're going to wrap this all up. So this was kind of the longest, sort of interactive or me talking, but let's actually share it again and see what the results were and see how we did. Whoops. I don't want to share. I want to slideshow. Excuse me.
It's updated.
All right. Yep. So real-time updated this, or rather Dan real-time updated this. And here's kind of where we netted out. It seems like people felt better about complete and accessible than they felt about clean and structured and kind of integrated with somewhere in the middle. It's kind of the way I'm sort of reading the slide, which is sort of interesting to tell. Most folks felt a little better in kind of the first and the last, but some work to do around cleaning up the data and structuring it, maybe even integrating. So interesting stuff. All right. Whoops. Sabina, let's
Yep.
talk about some best practices.
Excellent. Thank you. I think it's really helpful, as I mentioned earlier, for us to get a quick snapshot from each of you and how you're feeling about where you're at. And we took you through all the different dimensions of what we believe are critical to data readiness for AI. And now we're going to talk about the best practices to help you bridge that gap and make those improvements in the areas that you feel like you're deficient. We do recognize that you may not directly individually have the ability to influence or drive that change outright, but it starts with you and it starts with raising that concern and opportunity to deliver. So best practice number one, I saw this meme and I really loved it because I go back to early in my days of managing, customer accounts on spreadsheets. We took years to finally make the investment into a platform that was best suited for post-sales teams and not just relying on Salesforce or HubSpot or CRM. So we needed to be efficient. We talked about making sure that data is democratized, and that's all great. People get overwhelmed and they don't start. And that whole concept of perfection impedes progress really creeps in here. We don't need to make it perfect. We need to make it small. And I had a colleague who used to say, aim small to miss small. And I thought that was really negative. That's a really glass half full approach, glass half empty approach. But really what he meant by that was just get out there and start trying it, right? You got to start somewhere, pick maybe 3 key use cases and get those right. And it could simply be literally, the Sabina Pons example that Josh gave, right? Making sure that the same Sabina Pons is the same Sabina Pons so that you have a federated universal identifier ID for a single customer. Make that your number one mission and make sure that you can see those behaviors. Maybe the second one might be some companies still don't have the visibility to see how much revenue a particular customer represents to them, right? Making sure that you have that information and know when their renewal date is, basic things like that. It doesn't need to be incredibly robust. So that's where a key thing is you can do to start getting motions and movement in the right direction there. The next best practice, next slide, please. Next best practice is the idea that we think about, RACI models, right? So responsible, accountable, informed, consulted. If there isn't an owner of something, it's going to fall through the cracks. It won't get done. People have to have responsibility. And, years back, I would say when I first started at Maven Link and Cantata, we actually had someone who's responsible for data governance. Their job was to make sure that across sales ops, rev ops, professional services ops, finance and accounting, that when we talked about annual recurring revenue, that number was consistent, that we knew that ARR in Salesforce matched the ARR in NetSuite, and it had to be really clean and clear. And so his job was to do that. As tech has, this was like in 2016, for example. So as tech has evolved and things have evolved, the industry has expanded headcount, reduced headcount. Some of these things that are really important best practices have fallen by the wayside. And it doesn't necessarily need to be in a person's entire job. We have, chief data security officers. That's fantastic. But if you're not at the spot where you can have something like that, then be thoughtful about having somebody be the assistant regional manager, for example. Somebody who can have part of their role is monthly, maybe revisiting. When a team wants to request new data fields to be added to a specific schema, pressure test that and have that just go through and be able to document that and steward that. So for any major company initiatives, there's at least somebody who's thinking about it from that perspective and how that data will permeate across all of the different applications so that it doesn't disrupt anything. It's very much like that butterfly effect where, what you do or algebraic equation, what you do over here is going to impact over here. But if someone isn't stopping and thinking about that and holding teams accountable to that and just even slightly pressure testing it or challenging it and saying, wait a minute, have we thought through this? And they may say, yeah, absolutely. But without that focus and having somebody who owns that, even as a side project, it's going to lead to data dirtiness.
Yeah, I just to chime in for a second, and I think one of the things that we're starting to see is that companies are saying, "Oh, well, hearing from the CEO, I'll make AI this huge initiative. I don't know what it is, but I know I need it." And then you sort of get into it, and it's like, well, let's make a business case. If we think AI is going to have a productivity lift or a, revenue impact to the business, well, shoot, just like we'd have a marketing specialist or a salesperson or whatever to help grow revenue. If AI is going to grow revenue, we need to have the data to grow revenue. And so in order to have the data, we need a person to do it. And so making that business case becomes just super duper important. And I think you can actually get funding for it. We've seen this increasingly. Companies, e-teams are willing to fund that type of role.
And if you look at LinkedIn, there are literally jobs out there now popping up. Just as customer success manager was like a hot job of 2017. This concept of an AI manager or an AI officer, it's increasingly becoming popular. There's a need for it and somebody who needs to be focused on it. So it's a great call, Josh. Thank you for adding that in. Best practice number 3, change is hard. AI is scary. And couple that with dirty data and a legacy problem of dirty data, it's even more challenging. And so we have to be thoughtful as leaders and even as peers within our professional teams that there's a lot of things that are being layered in at one time. And if we want people to adhere and subscribe to not just contributing to data governance, but any change for that matter, we need to make sure that we're thoughtful about putting in the internal messaging and the change management the right way. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is making sure they understand what's in it for them. Like, why is this helpful for them? Why is this helpful for their job? Why is this helpful for visibility to nurture customers? Why is it helpful for visibility to understand if there's revenue growth opportunities? And what does it mean for them in terms of their own capacity, right? How many accounts can they be possibly managing at one time? How many customer escalations are coming in, and how many of their customers are actually engaging with the in-app tooltips and with the newsletters and with the user community that they have available to them. So it really helps them succeed and thrive in their role. And it ultimately helps the customer, which helps the company's bottom line. So if you think about that process as you're making these decisions and laying these things in, that's really important. Overwhelming the teams with new go-to-market initiatives, overwhelming the team with system changes, overwhelming them with new levels of responsibility that they may not have the innate skills to do yet, because some of this is new. It's new for all of us. We're learning about AI. We're learning about how best to maximize its capabilities, its benefits, and we're also learning the downfall of it as well. So the truth is that the more that we can be reading, the more we can be sharing information in forums like this, taking courses, communicating with each other, that's going to be helpful. But not everybody has the time or the capacity or the hunger to do that. So be thoughtful about the changes, manage them carefully, and really think about it from a what's in it for them perspective.
Great. If you have questions, by the way, any along the way, feel free to just jump in and raise your hand or ask them. The next thing I would say is sort of best practice is getting your revenue right. Increasingly, look, there's going to be lots of analysis is going to be done on accounts and users and everything from revenue forecasting to what are the drivers of churn, or what are the things that would make an account be healthier, or what's going to happen in this account. All of that assumes you've got a good understanding of like which accounts to prioritize. How are you going to do that? We're going to need to do revenue. You're going to need to be able to draw correlations to the thing that the business cares about the most. What's the thing the business cares about the most? Money. It's going to care about revenue. And so we need to make sure that we get revenue right away. And I am constantly amazed when we work with customers that, I say, hey, what's your Salesforce report that says, what your revenue is, what your churn was this past quarter? Customer's like, well, let me pull this report from Salesforce, and I'm going to change these 12 cells. And then I'm going to pray to, whatever deity, on the 7th day of the 8th month while Jupiter is doing whatever, and hope that I get the number right. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's, how do you run your business? Well, what's going to happen is finance is going to take all this data and they're going to go change it, at 10% and move these things around. And that's how they get the numbers. And you're like, why? Well, you've got to get a reliably produced revenue that's agreed across the company from systems, not spreadsheets. Just so important. And I would say that if that, pick a use case you want AI to start to work on, well, they're going to want revenue. I'm almost guaranteed at some point along the way. Which accounts, how much revenue is impacted by risk in the business? Well, if you can't tell you what the revenue is, it's not going to matter. So focus on that. Yeah, go ahead, Sabina. Yeah, go
I
for
was
it.
gonna say I'd like to jump in on this one because
Go
I was
for it.
going to
Good.
joke tongue in cheek. You forgot the sneeze too, right? All
Yeah.
the things have to happen and then you sneeze. But
Yeah.
in all seriousness, I have a client right now. They're a large publicly traded company, multi-billion-dollar in revenue, and I was doing some shadowing to get a sense for how people get their data to help recommend how to do it better. And this gentleman, I asked him, how many support tickets does Pfizer have? Because it's one of their biggest customers. How many open support tickets do they have? And what is the aging? And how are they dispositioned? What are the three major buckets that you're seeing that they're opening these support tickets? He goes to Power BI, and God bless him, but he's very really resourceful. He goes to Power BI, he goes to their internal tool, SMS, and he has to extract information to CSV files. And he is spending at least 20 minutes a day for each customer on correlating data to get those answers. That was the net. And I couldn't believe it. And I was like, it's literally what we're talking about. It's like, okay, Mercury's in retrograde, and you spin around on one toe, sneeze, jump, and make sure that the stars are aligned. But
Yeah.
it's a challenge for a lot of companies. And even the reason I mentioned the size of the customer is because it's a problem for big companies and small companies. It's a problem that people have to continually be chipping away at because data is never done. And it's really surprising to me that that's still a thing, but it's possible to make it better.
Absolutely. All right. Johnny Depp, we've seen enough of you. Okay. Now to Parks and Rec. Know what you want your data to do. It can't do everything. Sometimes there's a little bit of a hope that data is going to solve everything, and you have to know what you want your data to do. So, for example, data accuracy matters a ton with revenue. I don't know, how many emails your CSM sent this week. Yeah, that's important. You want it to be directionally correct. Whether it was 16 or 17, does that really, that's not probably going to change your business. And so what you want to do is you make sure that you're curating the data for the job you need, and make sure the data actually has to be accurate, and versus where AI can tolerate ambiguity. And this is, I think, a little bit of what Nupur was asking earlier. It's like, well, when do you just let sort of AI kind of understand it? And it's like, well, we're going to be able to tolerate more ambiguity on things like sentiment or things like, what are the major bits of communication or messages we're hearing from customers, summarize those and things like that. Those, you just gets a bunch of emails and maybe I missed a few emails, but it's going to get the general gist of things. And so, if you try and solve everything and make everything perfect, you'll end up just completely exhausted and defeated. And so, really understanding where do we want to go deep and make sure we're super accurate, and where can we tolerate ambiguity? All right, last kind of note, and then we'll jump into some best practice or some case studies, and we'll wrap up. Know how to connect the data. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. We talked about the data structure, but you can use a chain of logic. A chain of logic will work. You can connect Salesforce to Gainsight, Gainsight to Zendesk, Zendesk to Pendo. Okay, great. But really so much better to have those unique IDs everywhere. And having that solved early on is going to save you a ton of trouble later. The other thing I would say is that the one gotcha in all of this is understanding the data at the right level. So revenue at parent, for instance, we have one. We'll tell this in a case study in a second. Sort of what not to do was that they had all of their revenue at a parent level and telemetry at a child level. And so then where people were saying, well, is the customer using the product? Everybody looked rosy because if you rolled everything up at a parent level, everything looked great. But what really mattered was business unit A versus business unit B using the product. And so thinking about like, if I've got multiple contracts at an account, maybe I need to have child level revenue and then map that to usage to determine whether or not there's an account risk, things like that. So understanding kind of those levels of relationship. And that's, again, probably not something that any one person on this call is going to solve, but that's where CS ops, rev ops, and then, some sort of data, analyst or officer is going to really help you think through what's going to make that most useful. So.
We had a similar situation when I was back at Mavenlink, where we had a really basic customer scorecard that we had built in Salesforce. This was before we had invested in any kind of a customer success tool to help us with that scorecard of customer health. And we have a big MarTech customer. They're bi-coastal that had a big studio in LA and one in New York. And they represented about 400K of ARR. So I go to this lunch on site at their office in LA, and I think it's a relationship building meeting, talking about some of our upcoming roadmap and how we can do some co-marketing efforts. And the general manager of the site, who's our economic buyer, brought his finance director with him. And I was like, oh, that's fine. Glad to meet more people. Multi-threading is good. Well, it turns out they were breaking up with us. The scorecard said that they were 93% healthy, but I wasn't correlating data, which I have done now since in my career. I'll explain why. I have now since correlated data with accounts receivable information. And that's a little quick win that teams don't typically think about. But if they're not paying you on time, or they're suddenly short paying you, and it's been happening with some trending without meaningful explanation, where there's smoke, there could be fire. And they did love us. They were using our product, but they were going to be shutting down that entire location. So that was literally a 50% contraction on that account. They did persist with their New York office, but that was a really big rude awakening, and not much long after I got investment from approval from our board to make the investment in a platform. So looking at things like that, where they made it be fringe cases, but when there's trending and correlative data, you put it together and it tells a different picture.
That's right. That's exactly right. Good. All right. So let's do two quick stories of cautionary tales, questions along the way. Feel free to ask them. This is the example I started to tell, but a SaaS company wanted to use, in this case, we'll just be really clear, it's for Magnify. They wanted to use AI forecasting across the entire business. And it was a combination of multiple acquisitions and multiple systems and infrastructure, and revenue was adjusted manually by finance outside of systems, and sort of all the things that we worry about. And then the data was this complex mix of all these acquisitions across parent-child relationships. And it's like, well, this feature is in this system and that feature is in this system, and they're paying us here and they're paying us over there. And all of that was sort of in the mix. And here was the lesson learned, was that you got to start somewhere. And we should have started with, and basically it took a long time for forecasting to get accurate, much longer than it should have. And what we should have done is picked one BU and picked the one with the best data and really understood it and built out from there. And that those parent-child relationships should have been solved at the beginning. Eventually got there, but it took far longer. It was more effort than needed. And what that meant for a practical level was that if you're doing, like, say you were doing an internal project, people are going to be like, well, it's been 3 months, it's been, X months, and I still don't have an answer to these questions. Why is it taking so long? It's like, well, the data is a bear to wrangle. And how are we going to figure this all out? Well, pick a use case. And I think Sabina mentioned this earlier, like pick a use case and start somewhere where you've got reliable data. And then you can work out from there and add the next, it was the cartoon you had, Sabina, but like peel the next layer of the onion and cry when you get there. But you'll be able to solve that. Now, there are, and let me kind of contrast that to a much better example. So this was a SaaS company that actually in many ways had a lot more customers because they were targeted SMB. They had tens of thousands of customers on a subscription model. But what they did have was a single source of truth for revenue that was well understood. And so that you could go into Salesforce, look at the data, know what it's going to be. The data was not always integrated. They didn't have unique IDs everywhere, but they knew how to link the systems, kind of that chain of logic that we described. What we did after kind of we sort of started showing them, hey, we can connect these all with these chains of logic. They actually went back and, allowed unique IDs to link data together. And revenue forecasting was very straightforward to build out. It's high accuracy, 6 months out. You got the drivers of churn expansion. And then what you can do with all this insight, you've got all this data, these AI models are looking at stuff. They can say, oh, well, okay, well, what's going to happen? Why are they going to contract? Why are they going to expand? Let's go drive revenue and build some campaigns against it. In this case, they have a use of one of their features in their product, and they're building campaigns right now and driving revenue. And that's all possible because it moved so much faster, and it moved so much faster because the data was clean. And that's ultimately what we're going to encourage you to do is invest in having that data ready, and you'll be able to grow the revenue and make a difference in your business. So with that, we're coming right up on time. We got time for just a few more questions. Got any questions? Any other or comments or perspectives? We stunned you to silence with our rhetorical brilliance, haven't we, Sabina? Send them all. So
People are probably still spinning on the idea of Mercury needing to be in retrograde to get their data.
that's right. Very good. All right. Well, fantastic. Well, we thank everybody for their time. Grateful for you all here. This recording is going to be made available, as will the slides. And if you have questions, please feel free to email us. Our contact information is here. Follow us on LinkedIn, and we'd love to chat more with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.